I think I'm streaming now. I'm gonna listen to this John Lennox, and as I do, I'm gonna check my chat. So
for thousands of years, people have believed that there is a God. If God does exist, then the next question is, does he want us to find irrefutable proof of his existence? Here's the thing. God only exists because people want him to exist. And as long as that makes people happy and they do not harass non-believers, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having an imaginary friend. God exists in the same way Santa Claus exists. We wanted Santa Claus to exist because he brings joy and happiness, and let's not forget, presents. So we made him up.
I'm not convinced about comparing God with Santa Claus, ladies and gentlemen, because have you ever met an adult that came to believe in Santa Claus?
This guy says you made up God, like you made up Santa Claus, and that's fine if it makes you happy. Lennox won't dodge that. He's about to explain why a hidden God in Bethlehem beats one flipping the Eiffel Tower upside down. Miss this and you miss the actual answer. Do well to subscribe and drop your honest take in the comments below.
For thousands of years, people have believed that there is a God, a supreme being, the creator and sustainer of the universe. Will there ever be a Michelson-Morley type of experiment that proves that God too is a flawed hypothesis? The answer is no. Maybe I hear a big sigh of relief. Vice versa, can we prove that God does exist? Let us assume that there's only two options. Either God exists or he does not exist. If God does not exist, then there's obviously nothing to prove. If God does exist, then the next question is, does he want us to find irrefutable proof of his existence? Now, if God does not want us to find such proof, then there's nothing we can do about it. Assuming that God is all-powerful and that he created the entire universe, including the gravitational ripples in the 3 Kelvin background radiation and all the giraffes and all the platypuses, preventing us from finding scientific proof for his existence should be a piece of cake. That leaves just one option. God does allow us to find proof that he exists. But in that case, he made it very difficult. Because after thousands of years, we still have found no such proof. We found planets around other stars. We found the Higgs boson, but we have not found God. It is very simple for God to prove that he exists. If on a sunny afternoon, God shapes the clouds in the sky to read the message, tomorrow at noon, Greenwich Mean Time, I, God, will turn the Eiffel Tower upside down. And the next day that actually happens, I am converted. According to the Old Testament, God has awesome power, so it should be child's play to perform this small miracle and make me and everyone else on the planet believe in God. So clearly, God does not want to convert all the unbelievers in this simple and effective way. Why not? Apparently, God wants you to believe in him without scientific proof. This is called faith, and it deliberately leaves you in a perpetual state of uncertainty. You will despair, doubt, and maybe even hate God when a devastating earthquake destroys your hometown, killing 10,000 people. But you will praise and love him again when 10 days later, an old woman is found alive underneath the rubble. Here's the thing. God only exists because people want him to exist. And as long as that makes people happy and they do not harass non-believers, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having an imaginary friend. God exists in the same way Santa Claus exists. We wanted Santa Claus to exist because he brings joy and happiness and, let's not forget, presents. So we made him up. Throughout history, people all over the world wanted to believe that God existed, and so they made him up. Because it's a comforting thought that all things happen for a reason, and there is someone out there who loves you and takes care of you. In conclusion, it is impossible to prove that God does not exist, just like it's impossible to prove that there are no green pigs, fairies, or smurfs. People who believe in God should be grateful for that. Think about it this way. If you honestly believe that there is a God, and tomorrow some brilliant scientist proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that God does not exist, would you stop believing in God just because he is not real? Thank you.
Professor Lennox, may I ask you to answer that question if you...
No, of course you may. I'm not convinced about comparing God with Santa Claus, ladies and gentlemen, because have you ever met an adult that came to believe in Santa Claus?
You?
I think this is actually very important. The Freudian argument is brilliant and it works, provided there is no God. He's a wish fulfillment. And Germany's top psychiatrist, Manfred Lutz, has just written a book to make this point. If God does not exist, the argument that God is a wish fulfillment is brilliant. But if God does exist, the very same argument proves that atheism is wish fulfillment. The desire never to have to meet God, never to have to do with God, and so on. So Manfred Lutz's bottom line as a psychiatrist is, on the substantive question whether God exists or not, Freud, Jung, or Frankl can't help you. But I think what can help you, to come to your question, I was a bit puzzled when Peter here, and we've been getting on like a house on fire in the interval, said that God hides himself. That's only to a certain extent true. I mean, one of the central points I made, ladies and gentlemen, was my major reason for believing in God is that he hasn't hidden himself. He's revealed himself in space, time, and history in Jesus Christ. And it's that specificity of the incarnation, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, of their documentation, that for me is by far and away the biggest evidence that God does exist. What has often always impressed me about Christianity is this, that God doesn't force his way into our thinking. If he turned the Eiffel Tower upside down, I'd love to read the books by atheists the next day explaining how it happened. And that's not going to convince anybody. When God came into the world, he came in such a way that did not threaten people. They weren't wiped out by a colossal display of power. God came into the world almost incognito so that people could get to know him and get to see how he cared. And so, because the big thing at stake, to my mind, is human love and trust. And you don't win that by a display of magic tricks or power. You win it by what I believe happened during the incarnation. So I don't think God has hidden himself, but he hasn't made himself so obvious that you have to bow down whether you believe it or not, because you cannot get people to accept the truth on the basis of force. So you have to do it another way. And the central message of Christianity is, after all, that God loved the world, not that he was going to impose something by force. I believe in God, as you heard. I come from a nation, Northern Ireland, which is reputed for religious violence. I still believe in God. I live in a world which is full of suffering. I don't know how many 100,000 infants have died needlessly since we started our evening. And I can sympathize greatly with many of my colleagues who become atheists because of that. I have many friends who lost all their family in the Holocaust. I've stood and wept in Auschwitz many times. And this is a problem I face all the time, and it's the number one problem, and it's the most difficult problem. So give me a couple of moments just to say, we need a whole evening on this. But let me say one or two things. Firstly, I say that atheism claims to solve the problem by saying, that's just how life is. Dawkins says this universe is just as you'd expect it to be. If at bottom, there's no good, no evil, and no justice. But you see, that strikes me as a non-solution because it doesn't remove the suffering. It's still there. What it does remove is any hope. Now, you might say, as Dawkins did to me directly, that's it, it's bleak. That doesn't prove it's false. I said, Richard, that doesn't prove it's true either. We need to go deeper than that. Now, one of the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest bits of evidence for my Christian faith has to do with this problem, because we face it all the time. I, as a human being, discover I'm a moral being. I discover a desire for justice. Is that ultimately an illusion? Because if there is no God, and in particular, if there's no life after death, it is an illusion. The vast majority of people who have ever lived will never get justice. They'll never get relief. They will never have any answers to their hurt. A few of us in the West are lucky, and we may get some kind of justice in this life. Now, from my point of view, I have a problem. But you see, that is where I would like to suggest to you that Christianity is utterly unique, and it doesn't compete with any other religion, because no other religion offers me this. You see, at the heart of Christianity, there is a cross. And what I see there, if that really is God, now try and come with me. If you want to judge Christianity, you have to listen to what it says. If that really is God, what does that tell me? At the very least, it tells me this, that God has not remained distant from human suffering, but has himself become part of it. Now, that to my mind is profound, and I can see and have seen many times that becoming a window of possibility for people. Now, you know that the next claim is that Christ did not remain on the cross. He died and he rose again. Well, that opens up a vast new world for me. It means this, and this is my final thought. We can argue philosophically all night, all year. It's been done for thousands of years. What a good God should, could, must, might, all this kind of thing. And have you ever been satisfied by that argument? No. Why not? Because what we're faced with when all the arguing's finished is a world that's a mixed picture. It's a bit like Coventry Cathedral that was bombed during the war. You go into it, you see that a bomb has hit it, but you also see traces of beauty. Look at life, look at our world. It's beautiful. Keukenhof, phenomenal, which I visited for the first time last year, and it blew my mind away. But I see the barbed wire. I see the cancers. I see the tsunamis. So I'm presented in looking at this world with a mixed picture. So how do I face it? Well, I ask this question. I can't solve the philosophical question. And I say, look, is there any evidence anywhere in the universe that there's a God who cares and who I can ultimately trust with the answer? My answer to that is, from personal experience and all that I've said tonight, is that although I can't answer everything, I've learned enough, and I'm speaking very personally now because it is a personal thing. I believe I can trust God with the answer. Atheism has no answer whatsoever. It has no hope to offer. Ultimate hope, it may have temporal hope, and it is utterly no solution ultimately to the problem of evil and suffering.
So the atheist professor opens with a line that's supposed to end the conversation before it starts. God exists the same way Santa Claus exists. We wanted him to be real, so we invented him. And as long as it keeps people happy and they're not hurting anybody, what's the harm? That's the whole Christian faith reduced to a coping mechanism dressed up as compassion. And he doesn't stop at Santa. He goes for the hardest case he's got. He brings up an earthquake that kills 10,000 people and an old woman pulled alive from the rubble 10 days later and says that's the pattern. You'll hate God when the quake hits and love him again when the miracle happens, which just proves God's only real to you when it's convenient. That's a genuinely sharp point. If you've ever sat with a friend who walked away from faith after losing someone, you've heard some version of it. Don't let anybody tell you that's a weak argument. It isn't. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Lennox doesn't open with a counter-argument. He opens with a joke that's actually a real point. Have you ever met an adult who came to believe in Santa Claus? Stay with that for a second, because it's doing real work. The wish fulfillment theory only explains why people start believing something. It says nothing about whether the thing is true. And then Lennox does something most apologists wouldn't bother doing. He names the source. A German psychiatrist named Manfred Lutz wrote a whole book pointing out that the wish fulfillment argument cuts both directions. If God doesn't exist, sure, maybe we invented him because we wanted comfort. But if God does exist, the exact same logic says atheism is the wish fulfillment, the desire to never have to answer to anybody. Lennox isn't just trading insults here. He's showing you that you only believe that because you want it to be true is a knife that cuts the person holding it just as easily. But here's the honest part, and this is where I need you to actually pay attention instead of just cheering for your side. Lennox doesn't fully close the door the atheist opened. The deeper challenge buried under the Santa Claus joke is that a God who can't be tested either way isn't really making a falsifiable claim. And Lennox's answer to that isn't a knockout logical proof. It's something else entirely. He says God hasn't hidden himself. He's revealed himself in space and time, in history, in the actual life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's not Lennox dodging. That's Lennox relocating the whole argument. He's saying, don't ask me to prove an abstract concept called God. Look at a concrete claim about a concrete man at a concrete moment in history and test that instead. Whether that fully satisfies you depends on whether you think the resurrection is a historical question or a philosophical one, and that's worth sitting with, not steamrolling past. Then the atheist's Eiffel Tower dare comes back around, and here Lennox gives you the line that actually answers it. He says if God flipped the Eiffel Tower upside down tomorrow, he'd love to read the atheist's explanations the next day, because a forced miracle convinces nobody who doesn't want to be convinced. It just gets explained away. Then he says something that should stop you cold if you've ever wondered why God doesn't just settle the argument with a thunderbolt. God came into the world almost incognito, not wiped out by a colossal display of power, because the thing actually at stake is love and trust, and you don't win love by magic tricks. If you've ever had a doubt that sounded like, why won't God just prove it already? That's Lennox telling you force was never going to get you what you actually want from God anyway. Before we get to the moment that decides this whole thing, there's a piece you cannot skip past because it's Lennox's strongest philosophical move in the entire clip. He says as a human being, he discovers he's a moral being. He discovers a desire for justice. And then he asks the question that should needle anybody, believer or not. Is that desire ultimately an illusion? Because if there's no God, and especially instead of a debater. Lennox brings up Northern Ireland, his own home, famous for religious violence, and says he still believes in God. And then he says he has friends who lost their entire anything else in the whole clip. I can't solve the philosophical question. Not I have solved it, not here's my airtight answer to suffering. He says he cannot solve it. That's the single most honest thing said in this entire segment, because it's the moment a trained debater stops performing certainty he doesn't have and tells you the truth instead. And here's why that lands harder than a clever rebuttal ever could. The atheist's whole opening move was that faith is just people refusing to face hard truths. Lennox just faced one on camera in front of an audience and didn't flinch from it. So where does that leave the actual decision in this clips? Lennox doesn't out-argue the problem of evil. Nobody ever has, and he says so himself. What he does instead is point to the cross and say that whatever else is true, the Christian claim is that God didn't stay distant from human suffering. He became part of it. That's not a philosophy paper answer. That's a person who's wept at Auschwitz telling you he can trust God with a question he can't fully answer because of what he believes God already did about it. Compare that to the atheist's ending move. As long as it makes you happy, what's the harm? Which sounds compassionate until you notice it never has to risk being wrong about anything because it never claimed anything was true in the first place. If you're watching this with a faith that's never been tested out loud, this is what it looks like to hold your ground without faking certainty you don't have. If your faith is wobbling right now under exactly this kind of suffering, hear what Lennox actually said. Not that he has the answer, but that he's found enough to trust the one who does. And if you clicked on this hoping to watch the Christian get embarrassed, you got a fair fight instead of a straw man, and that's worth more than a cheap win. So here's the question for the comments, and I want a real answer, not a dodge. If Lennox is right that you can't solve the suffering question philosophically and can only trust God through it personally, is that faith or is that giving up on the question too soon?
All right. Um, I'm gonna um, so I don't know. I'm having um I said that works. Um Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Awesome.
I saw my reflection in a river of stars, drifting through the silence past forgotten hearts. I was drawing circles on the edge of the sky, like a dream remembering the reason it can fly. When mirrors on the horizon, where echoes in the rain, every wave becomes a memory, then returns again. When mirrors on the horizon, with shadows made of light, spinning through forever on the other side of night. Black holes turn slowly, like records in the dark, playing songs of distant futures. Inside every spark, every path becomes a question. Every question leaves a sign, like reflections crossing oceans through the geometry of time. I can feel the whole world breathing in the spaces in between, like a billion hidden stories flowing through what can't be seen. Every light becomes a signal, every signal leaves a trace, every trace becomes a picture on the horizon's face. Mirrors on the horizon, where echoes in the rain, every wave becomes a memory, and returns again. When mirrors on the horizon, with shadows made of light, spinning through forever on the other side of night. If the stars are only windows looking back through time, then maybe we're the answer to a question still alive. Maybe every distant heartbeat, every hope and every fear leaves a ripple in the darkness that another soul can hear. Entangled through the silence, separated by a breath, holding conversation softly across the edge of death. When the final stars grow quiet and the galaxies unwind, a new dawn waits beyond the darkness like a memory in the mind. When
mirrors on the horizon.
Yeah.
Miracles in the rain. Every wave becomes a memory, and it turns again. We're mirrors on the
Right.
horizon. We're shadows made of light, spinning through forever on the other side of night. On the other side of night. On the other side of night.
Ooh. Uh-oh.